I knew Karen was bad news the moment she moved in. Her pastel pink curtains hung like judgmental eyes from her second-story window, and her perfectly sculpted hedges felt like an accusation against my slightly overgrown lawn. She wasn't just any HOA president. She was the kind who measured the height of your grass with a ruler and sent violation notices for aesthetic inconsistencies. So when my porch light flickered twice and died, I had a sinking feeling that somehow, someway, this was her fault. At first, I assumed it was a minor outage, maybe a loose wire or a trip breaker, but when I checked, everything seemed fine. The real problem became clear when I stepped outside. A thick cable lay coiled like a dead snake on my lawn, severed at both ends. My power line. The realization hit me like a slap. Someone had cut it, and I knew exactly who. Karen. I stormed across the cul-de-sac, barely noticing the way the neighborhood was unnaturally quiet. No humming air conditioners, no flickering TV screens through windows. My focus was singular. The second I reached her doorstep, I pounded on the door. It opened with an infuriating slowness, revealing Karen in a pastel cardigan and khakis, a smug smile already in place. "Oh, it's you," she said, crossing her arms. "What seems to be the problem?" I stepped forward, gripping the frayed end of my power line. "You cut my power." Karen gave an exaggerated gasp, pressing a hand to her chest. "Cut your power? I don't even own wire cutters. That would be vandalism." Her smirk told me she wasn't just responsible, she was proud of it. "You reported my security lights as too bright," I snapped. "And now, suddenly, my power's out? Don't play dumb." She sniffed. "Your lights were an eyesore. The HOA has regulations. You cut my power." "I took action," she corrected. "The neighborhood has standards." I opened my mouth to unload every choice word I had for her, but before I could, a voice called from across the street. "Hey, my power's out!" Karen's face went pale as more neighbors spilled out onto their porches, all of them confused, annoyed, or outright furious. The usual hum of the neighborhood, TVs, air conditioning units, the faint murmur of evening conversations, had been replaced with an unsettling silence. The only sounds were distant car alarms, probably triggered by the sudden power cut, and the rising chatter of frustrated homeowners realizing their electricity was gone. I turned back to her, savoring the moment. "Well, Karen, got anything to say?" She straightened her cardigan, her lips pursed like she was trying to find a way out of this. I was just addressing a violation," she stammered. "The neighborhood rules are very clear. Unsightly utility lines should be maintained. The landscapers must have misunderstood my instructions." "Misunderstood?" I let out a sharp laugh. "You told them to trim the unsightly wires, and they cut the power lines to the entire block?" She blinked rapidly, trying to regain control of the situation. I'll call someone to fix it." "Damn right you will," Mr. Thompson grumbled, stepping onto her porch. He was a retired electrician, and by the look on his face, he was already figuring out how big of a mess she'd made. "Do you even know how long it takes to repair something like this? We could be out for hours. Days." A few neighbors groaned at that. "Days?" Mrs. Simons clutched her phone. "I have frozen food in my fridge." "My kid's online class starts in the morning," someone else said. "My security system is down," another voice added. "This is a safety issue." Karen was rapidly losing control of the situation. The entitled smirk she usually wore was gone, replaced by something much more satisfying, panic. She pressed her hands together, forcing a smile. Now, everyone, let's not overreact. This is a minor setback." "A minor setback?" I repeated. "You took down an entire neighborhood's power just because you didn't like my floodlights." Karen's jaw tightened. "Those floodlights were excessive." "Oh, I'm sorry. Was my security a little inconvenient for you?" I shot back. "Maybe next time you won't resort to cutting people's damn power." Before Karen could respond, Mr. Thompson had already pulled out his phone and was calling the power company. He stepped away, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. This is going to cost a fortune to fix." Karen's eyes widened. "Cost?" "Oh yeah," I said, folding my arms. "Somebody's going to have to pay for this, and I'm pretty sure the HOA doesn't have a destroying public utilities budget." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. She must have realized the hole she'd just dug for herself. A few neighbors muttered about lawsuits, and someone was already recording the growing crowd on their phone. If Karen thought she could sweep this under the rug, she was in for a rude awakening. A moment later, Mr. Thompson returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. Power company says they'll send someone out, but this is classified as non-emergency damage. We're looking at a 24-hour wait. Minimum. 24 hours? A woman exclaimed. I work from home. The crowd's frustration bubbled over. Karen shrank back, gripping the doorframe like she wanted to vanish inside. For once, she had nothing to say. I took a step forward, lowering my voice. Hope you're ready for some consequences, Karen. Karen looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting from neighbor to neighbor as their frustration mounted. She had spent years wielding the HOA's power like a sword, slapping people with fines for the smallest infractions, but now the tables had turned. The crowd wasn't just angry, they wanted accountability, and Karen had nowhere to run. I crossed my arms. So Karen, how exactly are you planning to fix this? She forced a smile, the same condescending one she always used when handing out citations. Well, as HOA president, I'll ensure that... Oh, no, Mrs. Simons cut in, shaking her head. You're not sweeping this under the rug. This isn't some trash can left out an extra day. This is a whole neighborhood without power because of you. Karen let out a tight, nervous laugh. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Mr. Thompson scoffed. You told landscapers to tidy up the power lines. What the hell did you think was going to happen? I thought they would, I don't know, adjust them? Maybe move them underground? The crowd erupted in disbelief. Someone actually laughed. You think landscapers are just going to bury power lines? I asked, shaking my head. Do you even know how electricity works? Karen bristled. I don't need to. That's why I hire professionals. Well, you didn't hire professionals, Mr. Simons said, rubbing his temples. You hired the cheapest landscapers you could find, gave them vague instructions, and now the entire block is in the dark. Karen's fingers twitched at her sides, her control slipping. This is getting blown out of proportion. Blown out of proportion? I stepped forward, lowering my voice. Do you know what happens when power goes out for an extended period? She huffed. A little inconvenience. No, I cut in. People with medical devices can't charge them. Security systems shut down. People who work from home can't do their jobs. Food spoils. Elderly folks who rely on AC in this heat could end up in real danger. And all because you didn't like how my security lights looked? Karen blinked. She had spent so long nitpicking lawns and porch decorations that she had no clue how real-world consequences worked. She started, but she had no defense. That's when another voice rang out. I called the police. Heads turned toward Mr. Carson, the retired firefighter from down the street. He was standing near his front yard, phone in hand. They're on their way. Pretty sure cutting power lines falls under destruction of property, maybe even a felony. Karen paled. You called the police? Yes, I did. He crossed his arms. What, you thought you'd just get a slap on the wrist? The air shifted. The situation had gone from neighborhood drama to something much bigger. Karen opened her mouth, then shut it again. A faint sound in the distance. The wail of sirens, I smirked. Well, Karen, looks like you're finally going to get a real citation. The crowd's murmuring grew louder as the sirens approached, red and blue lights flickering down the street. Karen stood frozen on her porch, her face drained of its usual smugness. For years, she had ruled the HOA with an iron fist, treating minor infractions like criminal offenses. Now, for the first time, she was the one under scrutiny, and she didn't know how to handle it. The police cruiser rolled to a stop in front of her house, and two officers stepped out. One was a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense expression, the other a younger officer who immediately took in the crowd with a wary glance. The older officer, whose badge read St. Daniel's, approached. Who called it in? He asked. Mr. Carson raised a hand. That'd be me. The HOA president here, he pointed at Karen, had landscapers cut the power lines to the whole block. We've been out for almost an hour, and the power company says it won't be back anytime soon. Daniels turned to Karen. Is that true, ma'am? Karen forced a stiff smile. There's been a misunderstanding. I simply asked the landscapers to tidy up some unsightly cables. I had no idea they would sever power lines. Unsightly cables? Daniels repeated. He sighed, rubbing his temple like he was already exhausted. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? You can't just mess with power infrastructure because you don't like the way it looks. Karen stiffened. her hands tightening into fists at her sides. I didn't personally cut anything. Daniels didn't look impressed. That doesn't matter. If you ordered someone to tamper with public utilities, you're responsible. A few neighbors muttered in agreement. Karen's face reddened. This is ridiculous, she snapped. It was a mistake. Why is everyone acting like I committed a crime? Because you might have, Daniels replied flatly. Interfering with power lines is a serious issue. People rely on electricity for essential needs. Medical devices, home security, even staying cool in this heat. Depending on the circumstances, this could fall under destruction of property or even reckless endangerment. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. The younger officer stepped forward. Do you have a copy of the order you gave the landscapers? Karen hesitated. Well, it was verbal. Convenient, I muttered under my breath. Daniels turned to the crowd. Did anyone witness the landscapers cutting the power lines? Several hands shot up. Mr. Simons nodded. I saw them. I asked what they were doing, and one of them told me they were just following orders from the HOA. Karen paled even further. Daniels sighed. All right, we're going to need to take some statements. He turned back to Karen. In the meantime, since this involves potential damage to public utilities, we'll have to report it. Depending on what the power company finds, you could be facing fines, or worse. Karen's composure cracked. Fines, she shrieked. You can't fine me. I run this HOA. Daniels arched an eyebrow. Ma'am, the HOA isn't above the law. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had spent years nitpicking people over the tiniest violations was now staring down real consequences. As the officers started gathering statements, Karen took a step toward me, lowering her voice. You did this, she hissed. You turned the neighborhood against me. I smirked. No, Karen, you did that all on your own. She opened her mouth to respond, but just then her porch lights flickered on. Then the street lights. Then the distant hum of AC units powering back to life. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crowd. Looks like the power company worked faster than expected, Mr. Thompson said, glancing toward his house. Karen let out a relieved breath. Too soon. Daniels turned to her. Lucky for you, but that doesn't mean you're off the hook. Karen looked around, realizing she had lost whatever little support she once had. The neighbors were done with her. Even if she somehow avoided charges, her reign over the HOA was crumbling. I leaned in slightly. Hope you're ready for some new HOA elections, Karen. She said nothing, just turned and stormed inside, slamming the door behind her. As the crowd slowly dispersed, people exchanging relieved glances and shaking their heads at the night's chaos, Mr. Carson clapped me on the back. Well, that was entertaining, I chuckled. Could have done without the power outage, though, he grinned. Yeah, but worth it to see Karen finally get what she deserves. I had to agree.